In the small town of Willow Springs, surrounded by greenery and silence, Louise lived in a dream of true love that awakens the soul and gives meaning to life. When she married Ken, she thought she had found the one happiness she had always dreamed of. Ken was a dependable man, essentially an unyielding fortress to lean on. He worked hard to provide for his family, came home every night, and never hurt anyone. But his love seemed to Louise like a deeply ingrained habit rather than a sincere feeling, a duty he fulfilled without realizing its true meaning. Every day in their home passed in a monotonous routine. Talk of business, shopping, and bills filled the void left by the absence of passion. Louise remembered how sincerity had once reigned in her heart, how she had rejoiced in even the smallest things. In an attempt to find solace, she turned her attention to her only son, John. With his arrival, all of Louise's aspirations and dreams seemed to take on a new breath. He was her light in the dark realm of humdrum life. Every day he shook the world with his innocence and energy. The feelings Louise had for John were 100 times brighter than anything life had to offer. She looked up to him when he laughed, when he proudly ran to her with flowers picked in the backyard. But despite the clarity of his love, she often felt a coldness between herself and Ken. His eyes lacked the radiant tenderness her son had shown, and Louise sometimes wondered if she would ever feel that warmth again. One autumn evening, there was silence in their cozy kitchen. Louise stood at the stove, breathing in the sweet aroma of baked apple pie. John, who had run off with his toys, suddenly returned, clutching a gift wrapped in colored paper. Her heart filled with pride as he declared, "Mom, I love you." That moment was like a light at the end of a narrow tunnel. Ken, sitting at the table with the newspaper, couldn't help but notice the smile spread across Louise's face at his word. It was the spark she had longed for. Shortly afterward, however, he looked at them with a slight expression of displeasure, and the moment of happiness was once again subsumed by the sullen atmosphere. It was as if his eyes reflected not only his own sadness, but also his lack of understanding of how to open up, how to share simple human emotions. Unable to tolerate the constant lack of romance and emotional connection, Louise decided it was time to take action. What if she gave him a unique evening that would be the beginning of a new chapter in their lives? She preoccupied herself with the preparations, choosing every detail with great care. Candlelight dinner, music, everything to create a magical atmosphere that she hoped could loosen their forced clamps. That evening she wore her favorite dress she had once worn on a date with Ken. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded of the Louise that truly believed in love that fueled the flames of desire. At that moment, in the distance, outside the window, the stars began to twinkle as her hopes for happiness rekindled the warmth in her soul. With every sound of her heart, she felt her dream of true intimacy filling her life with meaning. When Ken came home and saw her smiling, he forgot his worries and resentments. He was amazed at how beautiful she looked. This was something new, so much so that it sharpened his senses to the breaking point. They sat down at the table, steeped in the coziness and magic of the moment, and suddenly, all the daggered discussion in their dialogue about debts and affairs vanished. Louise made up her mind, and, overcoming her fear, began to talk about her feelings, about how important his words, his touch, his attention were to her. She longed to be loved as she had once been. With every word she uttered, she felt an overwhelming flood of emotion enter their relationship. The ice between them began to crack. Ken was silent, but his mind was full of memories, moments of happiness they had shared at the beginning of their journey. He could no longer deny that he needed Louise, just as she was. He looked up and noticed something that warped his world, that little spark of love that had once gripped him. It was only then that they noticed how important it was to be close, no matter how much time had passed since then. That evening was a turning point for them. Louise and Ken reunited not only in love, but in dreams of their shared future. John had watched his parents, without even realizing it, reawaken their feelings of unity. He knew, as they did, that happiness was more than just words. It was tender glances, touches, and most importantly, that desire to share their lives with those they loved. And responding to the inner impulses, they hesitantly stepped towards each other, joining in an embrace full of love and warmth. There was an ethereal magic in the air, and even the stars outside the window seemed brighter, reflecting the unconditional joy that Louise and Ken shared. They wished for each other to be near each other again, and their hearts beat in unison like never before. The storm of everyday life had finally given way to harmony. Louise tossed and turned in bed all night, her thoughts lingering in her mind like night shadows that chained her soul. Her heart ached with thoughts of the future, and every rustle in the house seemed to remind her of the emptiness left by Ken's departure. Even though she had made the decision to start a new life, fear and uncertainty still plagued her inner world. After briefly thinking about it, Louise got out of bed and, dressed in a warm sweater, quietly walked to the door of John's room. Silence enveloped the house, and as she opened the door, a sense of calm enveloped her. Moonlight streamed softly through the window, reflecting on the snow-white sheets. John was sleeping peacefully, curled up, his little body barely perceptible rising and falling to the rhythm of his quiet breathing. He looked so defenseless and peaceful that Louise couldn't hold back a gentle smile. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she leaned toward him, and at that moment she mistakenly thought that tenderness was flooding her whole, like a mystical vision. Suddenly, as if by some invisible force, she put her arms around him and kissed him lovingly on the forehead. It was a warmth that awakened in her what she had so long suppressed, the desire to be loved, to feel passion and tenderness. While John slept, Louise thought of her unfulfilled life, of dreams that had died in the routine. She felt an unquenchable fire burning inside her. All those thoughts about the difficulties they would have to overcome, about how they would get back on their feet together, only made her want her future to be bright and full of feelings. When Louise decided to go back to her room, she looked at John again and felt tears welling up in her eyes. Those tears were tears of hope and love. She clutched his soft toy to her as if seeking comfort. But at the same time, the thought flashed through her heart that not all was lost. She still wanted to feel, wanted intimacy and closeness. However, her thoughts suddenly returned to memories of Ken, how he could never give her what she was looking for, how he often forgot about her feelings. That dark shadow loomed over her. Suddenly, as if in answer to her inner challenge, she remembered the one person who had been there for her after everything, Matt, an old friend who had always ended up at her side. When he returned, she spoke. "I want to talk to you," she said, feeling the storm building up inside. He nodded, and their conversation drifted to the cozy atmosphere on the couch, where they both felt the sparks of a poignant long-awaited moment fill the space around them. It was as if an invisible pull pulled them toward each other, and Louise couldn't contain the urge to touch his hand. It was only a touch, but it made her heart jump, as if someone had launched a magical charge at her. He, without taking his eyes off her, leaned a little closer. "Louise, I've noticed how you've changed," he said with an expression full of tenderness. And then, as if everything in the world had frozen, time stood still, and she felt the simple words become an ocean of emotion that encompassed them. She looked up and saw in his eyes the same desire she kept inside her. In that moment, Louise illicitly felt herself becoming vulnerable, both of them ready for something more. Suddenly he leaned closer, put his arm around her shoulders, and she couldn't contain the storm of emotion that swept over her. He touched her lips with his, and it was a kiss that awakened everything in her. His lips were soft, hot and full of promise. Every touch they made was like a spark, igniting all the abandoned dreams of love and passion. Louise felt her body respond to his touch, rapidly dispelling the sadness and loneliness. The kiss deepened as they both gave themselves to this moment, forgetting all worries. The next frames were so intense, how her fingers slid down his neck, pulling him closer to her, how each caress of his bare skin turned them into a soul hungry for passion. When they finally parted, Louise felt lost in his arms, but at the same time found herself beside him. Their hearts beat in unison and they both knew that this was only the beginning. Now that she was back in reality, she felt no fear, only a sense of marvelous discovery. This was a new romance that canceled out the shadows of the past, and she was ready to explore this new warm feeling, open to a new life, filled with passion, love and real emotion. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Louise realized that all she needed was to be near the man who could share all her aspirations and dreams with her. And yet they both knew very well that there were amazing discoveries ahead of them, and their hearts were ready for this tumultuous experience of complete love and deep connection.